very warm welcome to the Understanding Users podcast, brought to you by Researchable UX. It's great to have you with me. I'm your host, Mike Green. I'm a freelance user research lead and digital consultant based in the UK. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be chatting to various digital experts who I've had the pleasure of working with in recent years. They're from various disciplines, including user research, UX design, development, and product management. And there'll even be a digital business owner or two. I'll be talking to them about how they came to be in their current roles, what they've learned along the way, and what advice they may have for others getting into the field. These are intended to be relaxed, informal chats with professionals who are keen to share their experiences. So sit back and enjoy. So I thought I'd do something a little different for this episode. After 2 years of lockdowns and pretty much continual remote working, I actually went to a face-to-face UX event. Woohoo! Yes, I hopped in my car and I drove down to UXCampBrighton on the south coast of the UK. It styles itself as an Unconference for people interested in all areas of user experience, from interaction design to information architecture, user research to UX writing, and everything in between. It's the first time I've been to this event, and I actually really enjoyed myself. There was a great turnout and some very thought-provoking sessions and a really positive, supportive atmosphere throughout the day. Given the plethora of speakers and the variety of topics on offer, I wasn't able to attend every session. What I did do, though, was persuade 5 attendees, all of whom are giving talks on the day, to very kindly give me 10 minutes of their time to chat about their own careers and routes into UX, their day-to-day work, and the UX landscape as they see it. And of course, each of them played my 3-card challenge to share their favorite UX tool, favorite technique, and a UX trend they see or would like to see in the future. There's a bit of background noise on the recordings, as these were recorded live on the day, wherever we could find a quiet corner. But I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope you'll agree that this only adds to the atmosphere. As you'll hear from my guests, there was palpable joy in being able to meet and attend events like this in person again, after so long being hunkered down. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the episode. So I'm here at UXCampBrighton with my first guest, Stephen, and I'll just get Stephen to introduce himself first and what he does and who he works for.
Hi, I'm Stephen Tomlinson. I'm a experienced design director. I work for a company called Invica, which is a product and service design agency. And I've been in the industry for about 15 years now, coming largely from a sort of web design background, but then progressing through information architecture and into research and UX.
Brilliant. So is it your first time at UX Brighton, Stephen?
No, it's the second time I've been before. I really love the atmosphere here. It's very convivial, very open, collaborative, and it's great for like first-time speakers as well, which I really appreciate.
And you're doing a talk this afternoon, I think, is that right?
I am, yes. I'm talking about data visualization this afternoon.
Can you give us a quick elevator pitch for your talk?
I'm going to talk about how to tell stories with data, a few different ways you can, I guess, ask questions of it, give a little bit of a framework around choosing the right sort of visualization and the difference between, say, diagrams or data-driven stories or dashboards. And then we're going to do a little bit of design as well. We're going to get people to draw some data viz.
Fantastic. People get down and dirty with the designs. Here's a question for you to start with. How do you think UX designers can ensure they have the most impact on the products and service teams that they're working with?
That's a really good question. So, I feel like you come at it from 2 angles. One is making sure that you've done the necessary research to understand your audience and their needs and understand really what they're trying to achieve, what their motivations are and what their goals are, and what's getting in their way, and what success would look like for them. And you can only really do that through primary research, through speaking to people, through interviews, through ethnographic research. But then it's also about marrying that up with business goals. If you solve a problem for people, but it has no real value in the economy to do that, or maybe you're working for a charity, but it doesn't help them to achieve their organisational goals, then it's not really gonna continue, and it's not going to be successful as a product or service. So you do need to, I think, understand the value proposition of your product and service. That there's a value exchange between helping people to live a better life, to achieve their tasks, to meet their own goals and objectives, but also helping organisations to deliver products and services. And that might be about making money, that might be about getting people to donate to charities, that might be about building collaborative workspaces and getting people to work together, whatever their goals and objectives are as an organisation.
Right. And what would you say the characteristics are of a good UX designer? What kind of typical traits do you see in people you work with or people you'd like to work with?
It's a very hard question to answer, because I think what's so interesting about user experience design is the generalism of it, of the field, and the fact that it's always changing and morphing, and there's so many different ways to approach it, and people from different backgrounds bring lots of different things to the discipline, which I find fascinating. But if I was to generalise, I guess it would be like a curiosity and a passion to learn and find out about things. I think as a user experience designer, you have to learn about people, you have to learn about systems, you have to learn about organisations, you have to learn about domains, you have to learn about, let's say you work in retail, you have to understand how retail works. If you're working in travel, you have to understand why people go on holiday and some of the frustrations. And also a sort of adaptability and a generalism. It's quite an ill-defined discipline, and I feel like if you are interested in doing lots of different things, then it's a really great job to have.
Right. What do you sort of touched on it in the last bit you said there, what do you love about what you do? What gets you up in the morning?
Well, it is that kind of, I feel spoilt that I get to learn about the world, and kind of sample it and learn new things all the time about how people behave, how organisations achieve their goals, all those sorts of things. And I remember at school sitting down with a career advisor, and I was doing A-levels, and I was doing psychology, I was doing computing, I was doing graphics, and the career advisor saying, like, these are all very different disciplines, you need to really like pick a direction, because these are all completely like, one's the humanities, and this is like a hard science, and now I feel utterly spoiled that all of these have sort of come together into a field, and that feels enormously beneficial.
So there's a sort of moral there: some don't always listen to careers advisors.
yes, it's okay to like have lots of different interests.
Yeah, and conversely, what frustrates you about what you do?
What frustrates me,
if anything?
I think sometimes you don't always... I work in an agency, so you don't always get to see things, build a single thing. Agencies tend to favour more generalism, shorter engagements rather. Whereas if you're working maybe client-side or within an organisation, you might be working on projects for a lot longer, for multiple years, to see a product or service through to fruition. But you might be more specialised. You might be dealing more with some of the finer details, and so I feel like working in an agency, sometimes you get frustrated that you don't get to see things through, but then there's some benefits to that as well. Right.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Last thing I'd like you to do is what I call my 3-card challenge, and I do this with all my podcast guests. So I've got 3 cards here, and on the back of each I've written either tool, technique or trend. And what I'd like you to do, so you can see there's a Ace of Hearts, there's a Jack of Spades and a Queen of Diamonds, and just pick one at a time and then tell me what your favourite UX tool is, your favourite technique, and a trend you see that either that maybe you like, maybe you don't like, maybe that frustrates you, anything like that. So go ahead and pick. That's it. Turn it over. Technique. So tell me about a UX technique that you favour or you like or you think is particularly powerful or valuable.
I feel like doing a design studio, so a workshop that has both a generative ideation kind of phase to it, get people sketching, get people coming up with ideas, getting people to do that, but also brings that to a close, so you do some prioritisation, you do some identifying the ideas that people are most excited about, is a really good kind of way to work with teams. And it doesn't always need to be just like interfaces or things that you're actually designing. You can get people to design a vision, you can get people to design the box of something that they're trying to sell, so you can get people to design all sorts of things, and it enables people to think about business problems or user needs in very different ways. Right,
thank you. Right, 2 more.
Tool.
What's your go-to tool, your favourite tool?
Well, even before the lockdown and the coronavirus pandemic, I was really enjoying a lot of the sort of whiteboarding tools like Miro and Mural, just for the ability to run workshops remotely and work with people all over the world. And I remember there was a famous interface kind of theorist, Jeff Raskin, wanted to build this thing called Zoom World. He had this idea of this like infinite 2D canvas was the ultimate kind of like model for a computer,
right,
rather than all these like files and folders and this kind of hierarchical system of finding information. He had this idea of just sort of moving around this infinite canvas and zooming in and out of it. It never really happened, but now it feels like it has sort of happened,
right,
with those sorts of tools. And in particular, I love working with Figma and FigJam. And working between the two, it's really easy to switch from whiteboarding to design and vice versa.
Right, interesting. Yeah, definitely Miro has become a very important tool of choice, hasn't it, during the pandemic. Last one, Queen of Diamonds, is a trend. So tell me about a trend you see in UX, maybe you like, maybe you don't like, maybe you'd like to see.
I feel like a big trend that maybe it's not so much in UX but in products and service design is around the role of automation. And sort of tangentially related to this is things like machine learning and AI models, and trying to find the overlap between those and the role of us as humans to continue to do the work. And often it's not easy to kind of build like a connection between those two, because machine learning models are by nature hard to understand, right, and you can't pick them apart and understand necessarily how they've come to the conclusions they always have. They can be a bit of a black box, and so it's quite hard to have people kind of working in information environment where they may be doing some forecasting and modelling in spreadsheets, but they're also using data science and trying to figure out how those two things connect. And that's true even of automation in a more sort of robotics sense.
Right.
It presents a lot of challenges for us to ensure that we still design good jobs for people, that that your work is still fulfilling and stuff, but we, as ever, take advantage of technology and allow it to move the field on.
Right. That's everything I wanted to cover with you. Do you have any other insights or wisdom that you'd like to share before I let you go and do your talk?
I'd like to say, if you are thinking of doing a talk or running a workshop, then come to UXCampBrighton whenever you can, because it's a really great conference to try that out and meet a lot of really interesting practitioners.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Stephen. Really appreciate it. So my next guest was Laura, and as you'll find out a bit more in a minute, I was particularly interested to talk to Laura because of her experience working in a large public sector organisation. Laura, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, where you come from.
I can. So I'm the head of design at HM Land Registry, so I work in central government, and we're the place you come to register your land and property interests. It's a huge organisation, and in the design team there, the design practice we call it, we've got content designers, interaction designers, accessibility specialists, and service designers. So it's quite a big team as far as design teams go. It's not the biggest one in government, but it is growing, and it's a great practice, really vibrant, really enthusiastic designers we have there.
And is it your first time at UXCampBrighton?
It isn't, no, not at all. I've been a few times before the pandemic, maybe something like 3 times I think it was, and spoke every time, been a presenter, and just love it. It's such a good supportive atmosphere. Everyone's really good, really supportive and enthusiastic, in whatever session you're doing, and I just love it. I love it. It's one of the best conferences in the UK. It really is, even though it's like a smaller Unconference. Yeah. Brilliant.
And what was your talk about today?
My talk was called, testing me now, At the Table or On the Menu, and that was basically alluding to this saying that we have where, do you have a seat at the table? Designers often don't have that seat, that buy-in from stakeholders, and my talk was basically all about changing the culture to get that buy-in, and what we can do as designers, because I had this controversial point in my talk where I was saying some of it's us, some of it's the way that we respond to the way we're treated, and actually we can design that too. We can design that communication, we can design the way we work and the ways of working with other people to build culture change, to get design buy-in.
Interesting. And what about you and your career path? How did you get to where you are now?
Mine is
into digital.
It's an interesting one. So I started off as a web developer. I think it's actually quite a common one, actually. So I studied computer science. I was a real techie. I loved anything as a kid that was technical. So I loved things like Lawnmower Man, the movie. I loved Star Wars. Anything that was, I had a ZX Spectrum. And did like basic programming on that, and I was really into that world. And I think as I got older and I got more experience and more confidence and with people, I found that they're just so much more interesting. Computers are kind of black and white. People are just these rainbow of colours and different things they get up to, and it's just really interesting knowing why they do what they do. And that's what attracted me into user-centered design, and that's how I ended up where I am now. And I'm kind of designing design at the moment. There's this meta dimension to my job where I'm designing a design practice and the ways we work with people. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
And it's interesting because you're in obviously central government, essentially kind of public sector, and I've been contracting in the public sector for about 6 years myself. And one of the things I love is the importance placed on user centricity and the design system and the GDS standards. And it's something that's not always the case, but it's really nice.
Not always, but in some ways it's like the public sector's more mature in that respect, because it is about the importance of humans and can they use that service. They're critical services, many of them. People getting their pensions and registering someone's death, for example. They're really important critical services, and they have to work. They support the economy. They support everything like that. So in a way, it can be more mature, and sometimes in a private sector organisation, not all. I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush. It can be a bit more, we are customer centric and, in inverted commas, but what does that actually mean? It makes a good sales pitch, a good strategy, but it doesn't actually get implemented anywhere, and there's a lot of barriers. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So how can UX teams then ensure they have the biggest impact, both on the user but also on the client or the internal sort of stakeholders?
If I knew that, I might be a millionaire, I think, but I'll give it a go. I think there's definitely something to be said for finding the right tension between delivering and getting the right user experience, the right usability for the people, the users that you're serving, because you can't just hang on to everything forever. You have to deliver something eventually to give value and to show that you are credible in giving value. But you also have to, design something right, and you have to. I think that's the biggest thing. Is just the relationships you have to concentrate on to do that. To build that credibility and trust are so important. They really are. I hope that answers the question.
It does. So following on from that, what characteristics make a good designer, do you think?
Curiosity. I think so. Someone's curious about other people, not just about design work and solving the problem. You do have to fall in love with the problem. It sounds like a bit of a trope, but you really do. To be passionate about it, to be curious about it. Asking good questions. I think if you can question, and also if you can listen. So they're all soft skills. I think a lot of these core skills are like soft skills that you can. Not everyone's born with them. You have to work at them. There's something you have to learn and get experience in, I think.
So what do you love about what you do? What gets you up in the morning about user experience?
I tell you what, there's several things actually. It's purposeful work. So it feels like we benefit the economy, we benefit society, which I think is good. The community I work with is a fantastic one, and I love bringing people together, a bit like UXCampBrighton actually. I think that's why it's my favourite conference, because it is like a huge community, and I look forward to seeing certain people every year. It's great, and that's the same. We've got the same sort of community where I work, so that's probably the two big things.
And what frustrates you about this world or the world you work in?
The world I work in as a design, as a theme on design. I probably have a few things.
But as a discipline, let's say, what's frustrating about it?
I suppose that's what I'm trying to hit upon, as a discipline, is that it's not really regulated. We don't have that understanding of, what we do, and it is just always building maturity is the biggest thing. You can't just go in and do your job. There's always like a load of invisible stuff to do around it. So I think that's the main thing. That it's quite a frustration. And funding.
Always.
Funding for design work.
All right, last thing. I've done this with everybody. 3 cards. There's a word on the back of each. If you could just take a card.
I'm going to go for that one.
And on the back,
Ooh, tool.
The word tool. So can you tell me your favourite or preferred, should we say, design tool?
Well,
UX
do
tool?
you know what? So because I'm not as an individual contributor, as a head of design, my tool is talking to people.
Right.
So that's a bit of a cop out. If it was
No,
to be,
it
if it was to be an actual tool, I use Asana a lot because
Right.
they keep my brain in check. Basically, everything I do goes in there,
Right.
and I organise it all in a timeline. I can see, what projects we're doing, who's working on what. What I've got to do next. So yeah, I do use design tools, but they're not my day job.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
I'd say Asana is a good one.
Asana.
And talking.
Go on and choose another card.
Another one, okay. Trend.
Tell me about a design trend, let's say, that you see or you'd like to see, maybe you don't like, anything at all.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be a trend. It is a trend at the moment because it's so something like accessibility, I would
Right.
say, is a trend right now, and it's a good trend. It's people are picking it up more. I hate the word. It shouldn't really be a trend. It just should happen.
Yeah.
It's the right thing to do, and especially in the public sector, it's becoming law. So,
Yeah.
or it already is law. So, I think anything to do with that, and I mentioned it in my talk about design justice, which is a really interesting thing about like who gets to do design, who are we excluding, who are we including, where's the bias towards who gets to do design, who we're designing for, all that. So I think anything to do with accessibility and design justice is really interesting right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. Right, and the last one,
Let's have a look.
another T.
Technique. Oh yes, lots of T's.
So a technique, again, you say you're sort of perhaps slightly removed from the day-to-day work, but maybe thinking back, a technique that you've used, that you've seen used, that you thought was particularly noteworthy, shall we say?
So I think this is going way back now when doing user research interviews, putting together discussion guides, talking to people to do the research. One that was really interesting was doing paired research.
Right.
So I think I'd worked on a project in the past with someone where they'd been doing holidays or something like that, and they got, rather than just speaking to someone who was booking a holiday, maybe like the wife, they got the wife and the husband in.
Right.
And then actually just listening to the interplay between the two told you so much more than you could have ever got out of just asking them direct questions to one person. You found out a lot about who made the decisions, their experiences in the past. Or do you remember when we went on that last holiday, or who forgot to book this?
Right.
So that is a really good technique for user researchers or design researchers. Is try and get a couple of people in that interview,
I like that.
depending on the topic.
And all sorts of kind of unspoken things will come out probably.
Body
from
language, very revealing.
Particularly with couples, I'm sure.
Couples,
That's great. That's been really great. Thank you so much. Do you have any other last tidbits or pearls of wisdom to share?
Oh, definitely come to UXCampBrighton again, because it's just so fantastic. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time,
Thank
Laura.
you.
Really
Thanks
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
So then I spoke to Chris. Now, Chris is an agency founder who's come on quite an interesting journey, and he gave a very insightful talk on the business of UX and selling UX in particular to clients. So I wanted to have a good chat with him. If I could just get you to introduce yourself first, Chris, who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Chris Myhill, and I run a digital agency called Pixel Bridge. We're based in London and Exeter.
And tell me a little bit about your journey into digital and UX. How did you get to where you are now?
Gosh, so I studied computer science at university. So primarily I trained as a developer, doing much more kind of coding orientated work, and learned really quickly that I am a rubbish developer. Cannot code to save my life. What I did find was that I really enjoyed making stuff that people could play around with and seeing kind of how that went down with them.
Right.
So I quickly gravitated towards prototyping and kind of doing almost deliberately rubbish code with the idea of putting together nice prototypes.
Right.
And then through that, I kind of started getting exposed to, at the time, human-computer interaction, or HCI, which was very much about how people interact with the products that we build, which then led me towards usability and UX and the idea of making products for people.
Right. And what is it that what do you love about UX? What makes you get up in the morning?
I really enjoy seeing the impact of something that we have a hand in creating, and learning how what we do can have a real benefit both on the people using our products but also on the organizations who are funding them.
Right. And conversely, what frustrates you about what you do, what we do as a discipline?
I guess kind of like the talk earlier, just justifying cost.
Right.
A lot of time is spent running a business. I've kind of had a newfound appreciation for how much work goes into being able to do work.
Right.
You know, if we could just get our heads down and do really awesome stuff that had an impact all the time, life would be such a good place. But a lot of investment in both time and money goes into paving the way to be able to do work, whether that is, trying to get yourself into a good job, or if it's trying to convince someone in the organization that the job is worth doing.
Right.
All of those things take a lot of time and a lot of nurturing.
Right. And in your talk earlier, you talked a little bit about kind of convincing clients, stakeholders of the value of UX. Just summarize it a little bit for us, kind of what you were saying.
Yeah, totally. So the talk was mostly about making a business case for UX and some things that I've learned around how to position the value of what we do in our industry. So that is both value from a kind of money point of view. The work that we do, if we do it well,
right,
can help the organization make more money, but it also delivers a lot of value from, putting them ahead of their competitors and brand loyalty and shareability and all of these things. But the main part of the talk was really just to try and convince everyone that although it's not the most glamorous part of the job, UX is the intersection of user needs, technology, and business goals. And quite often business goals end up being the ugly stepchild of the trinity.
Right.
Let's put a bit more emphasis on that and really try and make sure that the work we're doing delivers against business objectives.
Right. And with a user-centric hat on, how can UXers ensure that what they're building is delivering the most value and kind of meeting user needs and not just client needs?
Yeah, totally. I think ideally they kind of come part and parcel.
Right.
Most of the time, if you're providing the user with a very lovely experience that they want to come back and use, that does deliver value to the organization.
Right.
I think more often than not, it's a case of framing it.
Right.
So rather than trying to be, I think designers really enjoy being really altruistic and really thinking about how we can make people feel great, and that's lovely, and I'm totally on board with it. But sometimes we also need to flip the script on that and talk to businesses around how those same things can deliver real value to the organization.
Right. And your agency is Pixel Fridge, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
How old is it?
We're 3 years old.
3 years old.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about kind of the lessons you've learned and the last 3 years of Pixel Fridge.
Yeah, starting an agency right before a pandemic, it was really super timing.
Right.
It's been great, really. We started with 3 of us, so myself, Nick and Tom. We're quite lucky because we've all worked together for a long time,
right,
and the 3 of us at previous agencies all headed up our respective disciplines.
Right.
So I was head of UX, Tom was head of development, and Nick was head of client services. So between us, we kind of did all the different pieces in order to deliver a digital product.
Right.
We've just kind of grown out from that, really.
Right. What advice would you give to someone thinking of starting their own agency?
I think starting an agency, just be a nice. It sounds cliche, but be a nice person and just try and make a lot of friends. There is so much value in having a network and knowing lots of people who can help you out or put you in contact with someone who needs help.
Right.
The big thing that has allowed us to survive and actually thrive in the last few years has been our network and has been the awesome people that we've kind of met and known along the way.
Right.
And knowing people who are great at what they do is just really valuable.
Yeah. And in terms of advice and tips for someone wanting to get into UX as a discipline, maybe at a sort of lower level, what advice would you give to somebody?
I think practice makes perfect. I think there's a lot of theory to UX, and it can be quite easy to get bogged down in the kind of academic side of things.
Right.
In fact, I'm aware of like how many like courses there are and how many learning tracks you can go on, and all that stuff's really good, but it just can't replace actual experience. And I think I've learned more. It kind of going back. I sound like a broken record with it, but going back to like meeting business objectives, it's one of those things that's so important to our craft. Working with clients, understanding that you are providing a service to someone who is paying for the service. Like those sorts of things can't really be taught. You kind of have to work at. You have to work at. Like real projects that have real business objectives, that have real goals that you can try and meet.
Right.
So if you can find a mentor,
right,
that's a really good place to start. But also if you can find someone who will give you a project, even if it's an unpaid project, like, unpaid work isn't great, but then again, learning isn't, academic learning isn't paid either. So, try and work for a charity,
right.
Find someone who's doing social good in your community who could benefit from a website or an app or even just some design thinking, and try and do some work for them, and kind of taking into account their organization, what it needs. You'll learn so much from from that.
So sort of rolling your sleeves up and getting down and dirty in the real world.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah. Brilliant. Right, last thing before I let you go, I've got 3 cards here, and on the back of these 3 cards I've written the word tool, trend, or technique. And I'm going to get you to pick one. So we've got the Ace of Hearts, the Queen of Diamonds, and the Jack of Spades. So if you could just pick the first one.
It's got to be Queen, hasn't it? It's got to be Lizzie.
And then on the back, you've chosen, first of all,
trend.
So UX trends, be it one you like or dislike, something that you see, maybe something you'd like to see.
Gosh.
From your work.
That's a tricky one. I can tell you a trend. Maybe this is more personal than anything else.
Right.
But we've been really focused on mobile first design for a long time, right? So we've almost been kind of squashing our designs down to mobile, really thinking on like the constraints of a small screen, and that is of course really important. Something that we're seeing more of is actually starting to think about bigger screens.
Right.
With things like tethering, and like larger monitors, and it being more practical to engage with websites and apps on larger screens too.
Right.
Designing for XL screens has actually become a bit of a consideration. It's been something that we've had to introduce to our workflow in the last couple of years. Before we would always work up from a mobile design up to kind of like a large desktop design. Whereas now we're having to think about how that same experience scales to like a 4K TV, because more people are accessing the web and accessing digital on huge devices like televisions, or like in the presentation room we were just in, like screencasting up to a 4K TV. Just another thing that we're starting to think more about. Right,
interesting. And that's a sort of growing trend that you see.
It's certainly a trend in what our clients are interested in and what they're asking for.
Right.
Yeah.
Go on then, choose another card.
Go on then. Tool.
Tell me about your favourite UX tool, or one that's your kind of tool of choice.
Well, Figma is just awesome.
Right.
Like that probably won't be a surprising one. I think every designer here is probably using it. But in terms of like asynchronous design in the clouds, like we're a team of multiple designers.
Yep.
And quite often we're working on the same projects. And I cannot even describe to you the faff of having to like send a sketch file around and keep track of versioning. And even with like Cloud Sync, it was just impossible. Having design tools like Figma is so cool for working collaboratively, especially now that we're kind of doing so much work remotely.
Right.
In terms of tools that we're still trying to get to grips with, I think animation prototyping is a big one.
Right.
So we're messing around with things like Principle, and I think Principle's the main one. There's is it Flinto is another one that we've kind of we've experimented with. But these are tools for kind of looking at micro interactions. So, if I'm, as a user, going to hover over a button, click on the button, can we introduce some delight, some joy, some meaning in like what happens when I click on it visually, and that is becoming a really important part of the design work that we do. So yeah, animation prototyping is where we're setting our sights on next.
Great stuff. And the last one, Jack of Spades, is a technique. So what's your favoured UX technique? Something that you typically go to?
How specific are we talking?
Up to you.
Just talking like silliness. One of my favourite UX techniques is the 5 whys,
right?
Or the otherwise known as the annoying toddler technique. And the 5 whys are why, and why.
Yeah.
And it's something that we use over and over again in interviews, because quite often, when you're interviewing either a client stakeholder or a user, they probably won't give you what you need the first time you ask.
Yeah.
And it's not until that you keep asking them the question, why do you do this? Why do you do this? Oh, that's interesting. Why is that? Yeah. That they start to really drill into the context and like the drivers behind why things exist.
Yes.
So yeah, I'd say that's probably my favourite technique as a designer.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that. That's a good one. Before I let you go, any last comments, thoughts, insights you'd like to share?
Just how happy I am to be back doing this sort of thing, to be honest. It's nice to see everyone together in person and not sat in front of a Zoom call.
Yeah.
As much as I'm a technologist, I really like to get a break from technology.
Yes.
So even when we're talking about it, it's nice to do that with human voices.
In person, yeah. And UX is a people and tech business, isn't it, really? So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much indeed, Chris. Really appreciate your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike.
Then I talked to Alex. Alex is a UX director, and he'd given a talk about the role of flexible user interfaces in complex applications, which have been well worth going to. So I wanted to have a chat with him. So my next guest is Alex. Alex, if I could just get you to introduce yourself and your role and who you work for.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Alex Boxavanis. I head up the experience design team at Reason. We're a small agency up in London.
Great. And is it your first time at UXCampBrighton?
It's my second time, I think, actually, if I remember correctly. Like, the last time was obviously a couple of years ago, before the world went a bit sideways.
That's right. Right. And I went to your talk earlier, and it's really interesting. Would you mind just giving a kind of quick summary of what you were talking about?
Yeah, sure. So over the last couple of years, I've worked a lot with people who use enterprise systems or design enterprise systems, and a lot of those systems you find end up being very customizable or needed to be customizable. Although it's not really obvious all the time when and how and why, and sometimes you have to get called upon to justify, especially to an engineering team, why do you have to make things more complex? I thought we were trying to replace Excel.
Right.
So my talk was about, the rules around it, or my experience. When should you do it? Why should you do it? And how to do it in a good way, because it's not always a great solution.
Absolutely. And tell me about your route into user experience and how you got to where you are now.
My route into user experience is actually through engineering. So I grew up in an engineering family. My dad was an electronics engineer. So what I studied was more around electrical and computer engineering. I started building some stuff, building my own software. I didn't quite practice it a lot professionally, but then turns out that as I started building certain things, people weren't quite using it exactly the way I expected. And I'm like, wait a minute, there must be something there. There must be a way that I can convince those people to use my software the way I liked it, the way I designed it.
Right.
And then I realized that design itself is a much kind of wider discipline. I came to London, studied human-computer interaction,
right.
Which is a very kind of, formal way of learning about user experience and ergonomics and fun things like that. And since then I kind of very quickly got into consulting, because I like lots of interesting problems being thrown at me.
Right. And what in particular do you love about what you do? You mentioned kind of different problems. Is there any specific thing that you love doing?
Well, I guess as an engineer, or somebody with an engineering heritage, obviously I don't get to make that many things nowadays. I have lots of side projects, but I still like to have a peek behind the scenes on how certain businesses work. So, I work right now with a massive kind of multinational clothing manufacturer, and you get to see anything from how jeans are being made all the way to how they're being shipped all around the world and forecasted where they need to go and put on a shelf of a store. And I've done the same thing. I've worked with airlines, I've worked with airports, I've worked with, I think the strangest assignment was like going down to some oil company in Saudi Arabia, and you get to peek probably more than your average person on how the world works.
Right. And conversely, I've been asking other guests, what frustrates you about what you do? What are the challenges you kind of face day to day?
It's very hard for people to frustrate me, I would say. I mean, the one thing that sometimes frustrates me, I get really, really annoyed, my colleagues know this, is if this very basic technology doesn't work, and I walk into a meeting room and I can't just figure out how to log into some teleconferencing system or plug my laptop in and present something, then I get very visibly annoyed, because I know it could work. I know there is ways to make it work, and just why have we not found those ways? The other thing that I guess more in my actual job is I get a bit not so frustrated, I get maybe annoyed or disappointed when I haven't yet found a way to explain the value to people, and it turns out that somebody has decided, we don't really need designers on this project, we can just sketch something and get the engineering team to build it. And it's not that they necessarily always come from a bad place. I see this as a challenge for me. How could I explain to them better what value I'm bringing there?
Right. And how, in your view, can UX teams, experience design teams, ensure that they have the biggest impact, both for the user and for the business or the client?
I feel like where a lot of designers need to get slightly better at, it's not that they don't care, it's just understanding a little bit about the business that they work for, whether it's their client as a consultancy or whether it's the business that they're directly employed by. And I used to teach a course in design leadership, and one of the kind of activities that I got people is here's a company's annual accounts, here's their the annual report, go and take a look and see, how do these people make money, how do they lose money, who's on their board, what are the different perspectives, what do they publicly care about enough to shout in the wider world. And I like to do that digging around and teach people to do this, because this is where you learn, you find more ways into making that impact.
Right. Interesting. So what characteristics do you think make good experienced designers? What sort of personal attributes do people need to be good in that role?
I think there's two things. I'm going to say curiosity is one, because I'm probably one of the most curious people, and I don't think you can do this job unless you're not curious. You have to ask enough questions, then you have to never be bored to ask enough questions. And I guess going with never be bored, I think there is an element of tenacity. Even though I've been doing that job for 15 years now, I still have to remind myself that change isn't automatic, isn't always quick. Sometimes you might be right now, but the results of you being right are only going to be seen in a couple of years later. So it's just you have to be a little bit patient and tenacious.
Right. And what advice would you give to somebody who wanted to get into experience design?
I think first of all, I would just say, make sure you're doing this for the right reasons.
Right.
When I interview, especially people who have come in and really want to do that job, I'm always mindful of, are you doing this because you just genuinely care about this job, or because sometimes there's lots of boot camps, there's a lot of things, sometimes people do see this as hey, it's a new popular thing and everyone can go and design a cool app. Right. So first of all, are you doing it for the right reasons? And then I guess one interesting kind of advice that I give to people, especially those who switch careers, is to find a way, as a hiring manager, to convince me how your previous career is linked to what you do. And I'm really happy that I've hired over the years people who have come from anything to from music, filmmaking, all sorts of other types of design and engineering and psychology. So I would also give people advice that the entry isn't just to start studying this from day one. You could make your way into user experience, and we need your perspectives from other parts of the world.
Right. No, very, very, absolutely true. Right, the last thing I want to get you to do is what I call my 3-card challenge. Right, so I've got 3 playing cards here: Queen of Diamonds, Ace of Hearts, and the Jack of Spades. And I've written on the back of each of them either the word trend, tool, or technique. So if I can get you to choose one, please.
I'll choose the ace.
And just tell me what's on the back.
Tool.
So tell me about your favoured UX tool or favourite tool, or the tool that you typically go to when you're working.
Does it need to be just one?
No, it can be more than one.
I mean,
tell me about your tools then.
it's actually a fun question for me because I like tools. I like building tools for people, and I like kind of exploring tools. My kind of number one principle that I apply to my team is like, you can use whatever tool you like as long as you convince me that it's helpful.
Yeah.
Tons of people are using Figma and are having a lot of fun on this, and I think it's definitely changed the collaboration element of design. But one that I've tried to use more recently that is more around research is a tool called Dovetail.
Right.
And it's really changed how quickly we could cut through some of the grunt work of like uploading the videos, transcribing them, analyzing them, and getting much more quickly to a conclusion about what were the key points in an interview, what do we want to take away from that.
Right. So that's more a user research tool.
Yeah, it's more of a user research tool. But it's very good at like communicating your kind of decisions because, especially if you keep going back to the same people, to the same topic, you can very nicely like tag all of that and build almost like a library of understanding that then, you're on board a new member of the team, you get a new designer, they could go and troll through what everybody else has said about a product or about a topic.
Interesting. Two more.
Okay.
Choose the next one.
So another one. So this is trend.
Ted, tell me about a trend in UX that you like or don't like, or that you see or you wish was a trend.
God, I'm probably the worst about this whole like trend things because I'm not sure I believe very much in trends. I always tell people, and actually somebody reminded me that my kind of last talk at UXCampBrighton 2 years ago was about that topic. Like, just take a critical attitude to any kind of trend. Like, I would very much wish that all of this talk, for example, about making everything on the blockchain and NFTs would go away. But actually, maybe I'm wrong. I would wish that somebody kind of takes a good critical view and finds a good use for that technology. So that's kind of like a bit like how I see trends. I don't tend to jump on them though.
No, yeah, exactly. Okay, and the last one is Jack of Spades, which is technique. So tell me about a UX technique that you use or your team uses that you like, or is particularly one that you prefer.
That's cool. There's a kind of probably like do loads of things that I don't even know if that's a real like technique. I was giving some advice to somebody yesterday about like prioritization. One of the things that I kind of, maybe it exists as a name technique, but I named it like kind of value mapping.
Right.
Or value chain mapping. And that applies to all sorts of things where you have a lot of complexity and a lot of things that you need to prioritize. And the question actually that came was, how do I prioritize between all sorts of different users? Everybody's coming and asking me, do this thing for this type of user and then do something else for another users. And I was like, quite often there is a value chain. Some person does X and then hands it off to somebody else and then hands it off to somebody else. And if you manage to map this,
right,
then you see where you need to start first, because if user A was supposed to have done something for user B to get value, if you're trying to focus on user B of much further down the chain without having focused enough on what the first user needed, then you're missing something out. Sometimes there's lots of shiny things that you can do in lots of areas, but unless you look for the value, where is it actually coming from? Where is the source? Where does it all start? You might be missing a trick.
Right, absolutely. And last thing, then I'll let you go. Any final kind of insight or golden nugget that you'd like to share?
Oh, insight or golden nugget? I don't know. Like, I guess on a personal level, it's just super exciting to be here and just be around people. And I don't think we'll ever, as an industry, go back to doing everything face to face again. I think the flexibility that's come over the last couple of years has been amazing, and myself and a lot of my team have managed to make good use of it. Actually, go and work from interesting places around the world, see our family more. But also, I think a lot of us have missed the face-to-face contact. So I'm good to see this coming back, and I'm hoping people will find, like with anything else, good uses for it. Like not just be in the office just so we can be in the office, but be in the office because we can make something meaningful, or be with a client, or be with another person face to face because we've genuinely believed that this is a good opportunity, a good reason to do it.
Yeah. And that ridiculous hybrid situation where you end up going into the office sometimes and still sitting on Zoom or Teams because some of the teams are remote, and you're thinking, why on earth am I doing this?
Yeah, I think this, to some extent, this will always happen, but one of the things that I'm kind of also trying to work is like, because we have remote teams, we have hybrid teams, we have hired in my company people that might be as far as Copenhagen or even India. And how do you deal with some of those things, like recognition, like taking somebody out for a drink or coffee? How do you do some of those things remotely? And it's forced me a lot to like think about, well, what is the outcome when I get somebody out for a coffee? Okay, yeah, it's fine to hang out with them with a coffee, but what do I get? Or what do they get? And maybe as a designer I can think of a different solution to get to the same outcome. So I think there's a lot of that stuff. I see a lot of things in the papers which is very kind of binary, very kind of naive views of that situation, like, oh, we'll never get back to the office, or oh, we must all eventually return to the office. And I think there's a better middle ground, and it's up to us designers to figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. On that inspiring note, just like to say thank you very much, Felix, for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's good. Thanks a lot for having me.
And last but by no means least was Al Power. Al's creative director and product designer at an agency on the South Coast. So my next guest is Al. Al, if I could just get you to introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about what you do and where you work and who you are.
Hi there, Mike. I'm Al Power, and I'm a creative director and lead designer for an agency in Brighton called Dab Apps. And we mainly build business systems of a wide variety for all kinds of customers, often with kind of quite complex needs. And I run a small team of designers, and we're often sort of thrown into the deep end, either improving an existing application or building something completely new, having to understand requirements, understand our users, often in a completely different space, each project. So it's fun and challenging.
Absolutely, I can imagine. And tell me about your journey into UX and digital. How did you get to where you are now?
So it's an interesting one. I used to be a developer, so I actually started out at the very lower end, back end, and gradually worked my way to the front end. And I've always been interested in the user and how they use things and why and how they do certain things. I started out when UX wasn't really a thing, when sort of information architecture maybe was the thing people were thinking about, and people were starting to be interested in how people use computers. I think it was called human-computer interaction. It was very much about the physical rather than the usability or the user experience. And I co-founded a UX group in Oxford called UX Oxford, which I ran for a few years, and that really got me into UX and then design, and then I kind of retrained as a designer, and here I am now working as a UI and UX designer.
Right. So, yeah, interesting. And is it your first time at UX Brighton?
It isn't. It's my fourth time, and I've spoken twice before, and it's such a welcoming environment. I'd highly recommend anyone who's interested in having a go at public speaking come to one of these UX events. They're usually self-organised, very friendly crowd, and everyone is super supportive of anyone, especially first-time speakers. So I'd highly recommend it.
Brilliant. And what was your talk today about? So I think you were talking first thing, weren't you?
Yes, go back all the way to the morning. My talk was about UI tips for success and how UX designers who are maybe not familiar with user interface design or visual design can break a existing design down into their component parts and rebuild it in a better way. Right. So thinking about like alignment, typography, color, calls to action, because often people find design as a general amorphous blob to be really confusing, and actually it doesn't have to be. So by breaking things down into a set of sort of high-level principles, you can look at an existing design and say, is this aligned right? Are there too many colours? Is the layout a bit wonky? Are there clear calls to action? And just by addressing each one of those things, you'll end up in a better place. Right.
And thinking a step beyond that in terms of ensuring UX designers can have impact on the end user, obviously critically, but also perhaps the clients and the stakeholders involved in the project. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a really interesting one, because often UX is very much about focusing on the user, but the users are there are other people involved in projects. There are people building the systems on the client side. There are people paying for the systems as well. So I think for me, user experience designers can really get ahead in their or up their game or get ahead in their career by starting to understand the words these different groups of users use. So if, for example, take someone who's paying for a project, they want a certain outcome, and being able to understand what drives them and almost doing kind of not user testing, but a kind of profiling your clients and what their needs are as well as your users, you'll end up with a better understanding. You might be doing exactly the same thing, but being able to frame something in ways that are meaningful to them. What do they care about? What's going to move, make them look good or make their project succeed from their perspective? And you can often take the output of user testing, user research, and you'd normally frame it in a certain way, but you can sort of flip it on its head in fresh terms that make more sense to sort of stakeholders or people paying the bills. And several of the talks today have been about the terminology that we use. There were some talks about like agile frameworks, and people love buzzwords. We all love buzzwords in our industry, and we forget that not a lot of people understand them. So I think just stepping back a little bit and being able to actually explain things in normal words can clear a lot of the clutter and the noise and the misunderstanding why we're doing something. Why are we doing user testing? Why are we doing usability testing? Why are we interviewing our users? And I think if we can explain that in terms that actually make sense to our stakeholders, then they're much more likely to buy into it.
Right. And taking into account everything you've just said, what characteristics make a good UXer, whether that be a visual UX designer or a researcher or a service designer? What personality traits do you need, do you think, to achieve some of those outcomes you just mentioned?
I think being a good listener. I think we are often brought in as experts, so we feel like we have to have the answers and we have to be certain about things. But I think being able to say, I don't quite understand that, can you explain that to me, or can you unpack that a little bit in a conversation with either a user or a stakeholder, it's amazing. It opens up, people like to be clearer, to be understood. And actually, if you become a good listener and a good facilitator, rather than someone who is maybe kind of saying, there's a time and a place for saying, for being the expert and telling people what to do or approaches that they should be taking. But actually, if you stop, listen, get used to awkward silences. If you're in a conversation with someone, there's nothing quite like just not talking for a little bit, and then people will open up a bit more and tell you a little bit more that they need. So for me, I think, and it's not natural, I love talking, but being able to be quiet and listen to people has enriched the work that I've been doing.
Right. And what do you love, Al, about UX, about this discipline, this industry?
Oh my goodness, that's a really, really tough question. I love the aspect of UX that brings together all the different viewpoints of everyone within a project. I think sometimes disciplines like user interface design or engineering or development, they all exist in their own little silos. They have their own languages, but UX is for me is one of the disciplines that really thinks about how all those different groups communicate.
Right.
And for me, it's the thing that ties things together really nicely.
If you were to flip that on its head, what frustrates you about UX?
I think it's probably the fact that because people don't always understand it or understand the values, they think it's just something that you do or sprinkle on. I think the same applies to visual design as well. Often you hear stakeholders saying, can you make this look good? Or can you do some UX? And I think that's as much our fault as it is theirs, because they don't really understand the process, the value, the reasons for. And I think that calls back to some of the previous things we were talking about, is like understanding and explaining the value of something. And I think as you get more senior in your career, it's easier to internalize things, and you do it for good reasons, but you can't always explain it.
Yeah.
I think having that beginner's mindset of actually asking yourself why do I do this each time, and understand that, unpack that, and then the next time you come to do this, you can actually explain why we're doing this to somebody, and you'll find that you're much more likely to get buy-in.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Last thing, my 3-card challenge. So I've got 3 playing cards here. Ace of Hearts, Queen of Diamonds, and a Jack of Spades. And I've written a word on the back of each. And I'm going to get you, first of all, just to choose a card.
I'm going to choose the Ace of Hearts.
And if you could just turn it over and tell me the word on the back.
Tool.
So I'm going to get you just to tell me what's your favourite UX tool and why. Something that you use or your team uses on a sort of regular basis.
Ooh, my favourite UX tool. That's a tough one. I would say it's not really a UX tool, but I like using a visual design app called Figma,
right?
Because it allows you to create and reuse what they call components or styles, or it's all about reusability. Right. And I found that extremely valuable for creating wireframes really quickly. There are other tools out there that are purpose built for that, but I found that because I do all my UI and visual design using this tool, I've realized that I can actually also do kind of more UX, more high level design, zoom out a little bit,
right.
Paint a 10,000 foot view using the same tooling.
Right.
I'd also say that I've recently started a project with a client who thinks exclusively in Excel, and that's his tool of design choice. And every time we approach a problem, his way of unpacking it is going to Excel, typing out some examples, and sort of playing with that. And I've found that actually meeting him, and for me, I never thought I'd say this, but learning how to use Excel better has actually helped me communicate with him and meet him at his level. So that's another flip side to tooling.
Right.
There was talks earlier today about what are the most popular design tools, and it was actually PowerPoint and Excel came out very highly because stakeholders and clients love using them.
Yeah, and it's meeting them where they are, isn't it?
Exactly.
And as you say, things like Figma and Sketch and all these other tools, most of them never heard of.
Yes, exactly. But I wouldn't advise actually doing any designing in Excel or PowerPoint.
Absolutely not. Okay, next card.
Queen of Diamonds. Trend.
So think about a trend in UX that you like, maybe you don't like, something that focuses your mind.
I guess it's less of a trend, but often UXers, especially those who do consulting, often focus on deliverables and reports and things like that. And I find that they can be quite, either people don't read them or, I don't know, it's seen as a thing you do, but there aren't really any outcomes that come from them if they're not used right. So I would say focus less on UX deliverables and think about outcomes instead. Like what are you trying to do or change? And I think if you can do that, then you're going to spend more time actually affecting change or talking to people about how you can change things, and less time writing reports that might not get read.
Right. Okay, absolutely agree. And last one.
The Jack of Clubs, technique.
So UX technique, again, a favourite technique or something that you typically use in your work?
A UX technique, a favourite technique of mine is probably kind of open card sorting, where you're understanding the terminology that people use within their systems. Because I work agency side, I get dropped into different clients all the time. They have their own buzzwords, they have their own ways of talking about things, and often actually doing a sort of an open card sort where you get people to write down what they call things, all the different terminology on a table on index cards, and then kind of rearrange them into sensible groups. Really helps me understand systems and how things flow and work together, because it can be quite information overload when you start a new project. So actually doing a kind of review of all the terminology that people use for their systems, what things are called, get them to explain them to you means that you understand how their systems work and what they're for a lot better. And I'd say keep a cheat sheet or a glossary which you can share with your team, within a given client space, so that everyone's on the same page. And the same thing works for the client. When you might talk about wireframes, you might talk about high fidelity visual designs, but often people don't know necessarily what they are. And I've had clients who think wireframes are the designs, or think designs are the wireframes. So actually having a common vocabulary that you can share as a glossary with a client can be super useful.
I really like that. I think it's really important, as you say, because there are so many terms on both sides of the fence, and it's easy to get confused. Thank you so much, Al. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it.
Many thanks to those of you listening to the Understanding Users podcast. And of course, many thanks as well to all of the 5 guests who took part in this episode. I really appreciated their time and their insights. If you all enjoyed what you heard, do please like or comment wherever you're listening, and feel free to share this episode more widely. And feel free, of course, to drop me a line with any feedback via LinkedIn or on my website, researchable.uk. Links are in the show notes. Join me again next time when I'll be talking to Scott Byrne-Fraser. He's co-founder and chief metaverse officer at the edtech startup Hundo. I can't wait to share the conversation he and I had with you all. Until then, stay safe and stay user-centered.